I'm Tanita, a research coordinator at the Postgraduate Research Department. Welcome to this tutorial on sampling. Please bear in mind that this video lecture is meant to supplement the research methodology guidelines. Let's begin with an explanation of a target population. A target population refers to all persons who belong to the population that the study is focusing on. For example, stakeholders of XYZ organization, or customers of ABC private hospital, or management at TVT company. Sampling then refers to selecting a proportion of people from this target population to include as part of your study. There are two major types of sampling. These are probability and non-probability sampling. Some general points to remember about probability sampling include: the sample should be representative of the population from which it is drawn. The sample must be selected randomly from the population. It is possible to generalize the findings from the sample to the population. Every person in the population has an equal chance or probability of being selected once included in the sampling frame. This concept of a sampling frame will become more evident when I discuss the different probability sampling techniques later on. Some general points to remember about non-probability sampling include the following. The overall aim is to select a sample that allows the researcher to capture a wide range of facets. Elements are selected from the target population in a deliberate manner so as to meet the criteria of a pre-constructed research design, as opposed to in a random manner. Generalization is not possible and therefore should not be an aim of studies that use non-probability sampling techniques. Every person in the sampling frame does not have an equal chance of being selected from the sampling frame. Therefore, if this is your target population, then a probability sampling technique would render a sample which would look like this. Whereas for the same target population, a non-probability sampling technique would render a sample which would look like this. To summarize, with probability sampling, the likelihood of any one member of the target population being selected is known. And with non-probability sampling, this likelihood is not known. And this is generally because the number of persons in the target population is not known or is irrelevant. Let's explore some types of probability and non-probability sampling techniques. Probability sampling techniques involve the following. Simple random sampling involves 4 basic steps, which include precisely defining the population, listing of all members of the population, numbering each member, and finally, using a method that chooses a specified number of randomly selected numbers, which, as indicated previously, corresponds with a specific member of the population. There are many online random number generators which you may use. Just search for these on an internet search engine. This type of sampling allows for all members of the target population to have an equal and independent chance of being selected as part of the sample. Systematic sampling involves every nth element being selected. So, with the first 3 steps mentioned earlier, defining the population, listing all members of the population, and numbering each member, the additional step is not to randomly select the numbers from this list, but rather to select every nth number on the list. Therefore, if it is predetermined to select every 4th participant from this list, then you would choose the following participants on the list: number 4, number 8, number 12, number 16, and so on, until you reach the end of the list. The interval that you select needs to correspond with the number of persons that you want to select for the sample. Therefore, if you have a target population of 1,000 people and you wish to select a sample of 200 respondents, then you would select every fifth number. But if you wish to obtain a sample of 100 respondents from this target population, then you would select every 10th number on the list, and so on. Moving on to stratified sampling. A stratum refers to a level or class to which people are assigned according to a specific aspect, such as position in an organization, level of education, and so on. For example, if you were doing a study which looks at the impact of leadership on employee performance at Protea Engineering Consultants, you will require a stratum of employees from Protea Engineering Consultants to provide an indication of the leadership styles that exist, and you will need a second separate stratum of managers from Protea Engineering Consultants to provide an objective measure of employee performance. Stratified sampling involves the following steps. Classifying the various strata in terms of the variables of interest, using a simple random sampling technique, which was discussed earlier, to select a sample from each stratum, which is statistically representative of that stratum. Another probability sampling technique that could be used is cluster sampling. When there is a large target population, and it may not be feasible to use a simple random sampling technique to select a representative sample, it may be more practical for the research to divide that population into clusters. Once these clusters have been determined, a simple random sampling technique may be used to select a representative sample from each cluster. Let's move on to some non-probability sampling techniques. Convenience sampling involves selecting persons who are easily accessible. For example, walking through a mall and selecting respondents who walk by. Judgment sampling involves deliberately selecting specific persons who would be able to provide insight into a specific area. For example, if you were to interview persons regarding the implementation of a new business strategy, it is futile to involve cleaning staff in your sample, but instead, you would target persons such as senior management and perhaps some middle managers who have been involved in the implementation process. Quota sampling refers to an alternative that can be used when stratified sampling is not possible. The population is divided proportionately into categories relative to the study being conducted. Thereafter, a judgment sampling technique is used to select persons from each category until the predetermined quota for each category has been met. The following two conditions must be satisfied for this method to be effective. The categories should have a distribution in the population that can be estimated. And secondly, the variable used in forming each category must be pertinent to the actual study. For example, if you needed to obtain a representative sample of males and females for a study on employee engagement at a specific organization made up of about 70% males and 30% females, and you required a sample of 10 respondents, your sample would include 7 males and 3 females. Maximum variation refers to a sampling technique where a phenomenon is being studied. The researcher seeks out and recruits subjects or settings which represent the greatest possible range of differences in the occurrence of this phenomenon. For example, if you were examining factors that impact on job satisfaction at an organization, you would obtain a varied sample of persons who fell along the continuum of job satisfaction. For example, those who were satisfied, those who were not satisfied, and perhaps even those who were unsure. Snowball sampling refers to a method where a probability or non-probability method is used to identify initial respondents, and then these respondents are asked to refer you to other respondents who would have insight into that particular research study. It is very important that you select the correct sampling strategy for your specific study. In general, you should remember that probability sampling techniques are more appropriate for positivistic or quantitative studies, and non-probability sampling techniques are more appropriate for phenomenological or qualitative studies. This is because probability sampling allows for greater representation of the population and therefore allows for greater generalizability or applicability back to the population, whereas qualitative studies are normally focused on understanding occurrences and phenomena. And so, it is generally more appropriate to use a purposive sampling method to target persons who would have had the most insight on these aspects. In terms of sample size, you should bear in mind that for a quantitative study, you must obtain a number of respondents which are representative of the population. While at Mencosa, it is suggested that a minimum of 100 respondents are required, 100 is not actually representative of a target population of 20,000. Also remember that the manner in which you decide on a suitable sample size must be supported by literature. For a qualitative study, it is suggested that you use about 8 to 12 respondents, but you are advised to sample to saturation. This means that you should continuously collect data from your sample until you feel that you have enough primary data to begin analyzing in a quest to answer your research questions. This may occur after interviewing 5 respondents or even after sampling 14. Thank you for viewing this video. I trust that it has increased your understanding of sampling.